What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. We've got Exodus 40 lined up for right now. So, since we're about to finish off Exodus, I guess I might as well give kind of a recap of everything so far. So, we ended Genesis with Joseph and his family. Well, Joseph already being in Egypt, and then, his family moving there with him to make it through the famine that was like everywhere else. But then the Egyptians, especially Pharaoh, wound up seeing them as kind of a threat over time. So subjected them to hard labor, and eventually, the people are crying out to be delivered from this oppression. So Moses is born, and despite the fact that Pharaoh had ordered all the Hebrew boys to be killed after, I don't know exactly what the time frame was, but Pharaoh had ordered all the, maybe I should say, Israelite boys to be killed. But Moses' parents were able to hide him away for a little while, then kind of sent him off in the Nile. He winds up at the palace, essentially, winds up getting sort of adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, in essence. I think it was Pharaoh's daughter. Anyway, so then he kind of grows up there, but then sees the oppression of his people and winds up killing one of the slave drivers, runs for his life, makes himself a whole life out in Midian, I believe. But then God calls him to go and save the people in Egypt. So Moses goes back to Egypt, does a bunch of that stuff, talks with Pharaoh, tries to convince him to let the people go. And Pharaoh says no, over and over again, despite various sets of plagues coming upon Egypt. Eventually, after Pharaoh's firstborn son is killed in one of these plagues, Pharaoh says, fine, go. So then they start leaving. Pharaoh kind of changes his mind, but the people end up crossing the Red Sea, and then Pharaoh's army gets washed away as the Red Sea kind of comes back in on itself. So then, after they've escaped Egypt, they head to Mount Sinai. God gives a bunch of commandments and stuff. Israelites very quickly disobey these commandments. But after there's an incident where they build a golden calf and start worshiping that instead of God, about 3,000 of them are killed for it, and then they're kind of, repentant after that. And then the past couple of chapters we've covered was on building the Tabernacle and all the tools for it, the priestly garments that would have been used for the priests serving in the Tabernacle, and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, okay, so there's your kind of SparkNotes version of Exodus 40, or not Exodus 40 specifically, but the book of Exodus as we've read it. Now I will have a different kind of version of an Exodus summary coming out in a YouTube video before too long. But anyway, okay, so now that we're caught up on everything that's happened, let's actually get into Exodus 40 here, which seems like it's going to be sort of a nice little bow wrapped on the whole tabernacle building thing. So, Exodus 40, here we go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Set up the tabernacle on the first day of the new year. Place the Ark of the Covenant inside, and install the inner curtain to enclose the Ark within the most holy place. Then bring in the table and arrange the utensils on it, and bring in the lampstand and set up the lamps." Okay, so footnotes, Hebrew confused with other less specific tense of meaning. Footnote on the first day of the new year, Hebrew says the first day of the first month. This day of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred in March or April, so that would have been, if I'm remembering correctly, it was called the month of Abib. I don't know if I'm getting that pronunciation right, but A-B-I-B is how that was spelled, at least. And so Moses is supposed to set up the tabernacle right at the start of the new year, or at least by their calendar. And I guess now God's giving him instructions for the order in which it is to be set up. Place the ark, because then it says place the Ark of the Covenant inside, and install the inner curtain to enclose the ark, then bring in the table. So yeah, it seems like it's probably going to work its way from the heart of it, from the Holy of Holies, outward. Footnote a covenant here. Ark of the Testimony, yeah. Again, we've established those are kind of interchangeable. Especially the word covenant or testimony. The Hebrew could kind of mean either. But anyway. Okay, so I guess I will move on to verse 5 then. This is still God speaking to Moses. Place the gold incense altar in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Then hang the curtain at the entrance of the tabernacle. Place the altar of burnt offering in front of the tabernacle entrance. Set the wash basin between the tabernacle and the altar and fill it with water. Then set up the courtyard around the outside of the tent and hang the curtain for the courtyard entrance. So yeah, this does seem to be kind of working, inside out, which, especially given the order of importance, kind of makes sense. Because you want to set up the most holy place first to keep that as, special and sacred, or as obvious as you can that that's special and sacred, and that, it's really the most important part of things and not to be messed with. But, so we've had, Ark of the Covenant, most holy place, and we got table and utensils and the lampstand right outside of that. Gold incense altar is in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So that's all kind of in the inner part. Then hang the curtain at the entrance. Place the altar of burnt offering in front of the entrance. I would assume in front of meaning just outside of. Set the wash basin between the tabernacle and the altar. Then again, maybe not. I don't know. Anyway. Okay. Also, I'm realizing stream has had a couple of issues. Just some frame drops, but nothing catastrophic, it seems. Anyway. Okay. Moving on to verse 9, because this is kind of a longer chapter, and I don't want to dwell too long on any one particular bit of it, unless it seems super duper important, like, discussion topic worthy. Okay, verse 9. Take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all its furnishings to consecrate them and make them holy. Anoint the altar of burnt offering and its utensils to consecrate them. Then the altar will become absolutely holy. Next, anoint the wash basin and its stand to consecrate them. Okay, so I guess the inner part was getting anointed first, and all the stuff that's inside of there. Then stepping outside of that is the altar and the wash basin and that kind of stuff. So that seems to kind of confirm that, yeah, altar of burnt offering and the wash basin were outside of, like, the actual tabernacle part of the whole structure. But anyway, I think I'll just move on to verse 12 because I don't have any other thoughts on that specifically. Present Aaron and his sons at the entrance of the tabernacle and wash them with water. Dress Aaron with the sacred garments and anoint him, consecrating him to serve me as priest. Then present his sons and dress them in their tunics. Anoint them as you did their father, so they may also serve me as priests. With their anointing, Aaron's descendants are set apart for the priesthood forever, from generation to generation. I assume the anointing continued to happen throughout those further generations. But, you know, at that moment, anointing them kind of set the precedent for that. And kind of made it clear to everybody that, okay, the line of Aaron will be, you know, the ones to serve me as priests. Okay, then verse 16, I guess. Moses proceeded to do everything just as the Lord had commanded him. So the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the month of the first day of the first month of the second year. Moses erected the tabernacle by setting down its bases, inserting the frames, attaching the crossbars, and setting up the posts. Then he spread the coverings over the tabernacle framework and put on the protective layers, just as the Lord had commanded him. It says Moses, I guess he could have done all this on his own, but I do wonder if maybe he would have gotten a little help. But it just says Moses because he kind of, you know, was the one instructed by God and leading the effort to get it set up. Also, when it says the second year here, I assume it's referring to that as like the second year after they had left Egypt. So basically it's been one full year at this point that they had left Egypt, gone through the wilderness a bit. Oh yeah, there was the whole thing with, you know, God providing manna and stuff for them in the midst of that before they got to Mount Sinai. And then at Mount Sinai, I mean, there was at least one instance of Moses being up on the mountain for 40 days. Possibly twice that happened. Because there were two different times of God giving Moses, you know, all the commandments that were written on the stone tablets for the covenant. So, it's not too absurd to think that, yeah, they had been out of Egypt for a year at this point. Because this is the first day, essentially, of the second year that they were out of Egypt. So that, yeah. Although it could have been not necessarily from them leaving Egypt, but from when they had, like, the Passover feast. Or whatever happened right before they left Egypt, that God established that as, like, the beginning of their their year. But anyway, I'm probably digressing a bit on, the semantics of what that means, but let's just assume it's been a year since they left Egypt. And on the first day of that second year, then Moses at least set up the tabernacle. Anyway. Okay, verse 20. He took the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant and placed them inside the ark. Then he attached the carrying poles to the ark, and he set the ark's cover, the place of atonement, on top of it. Then he brought the ark of the covenant into the tabernacle and hung the inner curtain to shield it from view, just as the Lord had commanded him. Next Moses placed the table in the tabernacle along the north side of the holy place, just outside the inner curtain. And he arranged the bread of the presence on the table before the Lord, just as the Lord had commanded him. Okay, so it didn't specifically mention him placing, there was supposed to be a bowl with some of the manna, I think, going in the Ark of the Covenant as well, if I remember right. I mean, it's possible that also happened and it just didn't mention it specifically here, but it may or may not be there at this moment. I don't know. Placed. Okay, Hebrew just says he placed the testimony rather than saying the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant, because that was kind of their testimony, especially capitalized like that, was basically their term for referring to the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. Rather than saying that long phrase all the time, they just referred to it as the testimony. Kind of similar to, I know I'm jumping way ahead in the Bible, but for comparison's sake, kind of similar to how people will talk about, the passion of the Christ, referring to possibly the trial thing, but definitely the whipping, the torture, the carrying of the cross, and the crucifixion, that whole bit. Rather than talking separately about all those things, it's like, okay, they use the term passion to refer to that, which I found odd when I really first became acquainted with that terminology, but I just, I eventually learned that, oh, okay, that's the common vernacular, I guess, or terminology, whatever. Still, bread of the presence, still kind of wondering what the deal is with that, but anyway, if anybody knows specifically what the deal is with that, because I don't recall it being explained very well what exactly the bread of the presence was supposed to be. Just bread that was set aside for a specific purpose is kind of what you would think. But I don't know. Anyway. Alrighty. Moving along, I guess, to verse 24. He set the lampstand in the tabernacle across from the table on the south side of the holy place. Then he lit the lamps in the Lord's presence, just as the Lord had commanded him. He also placed the gold incense altar in the tabernacle, in the holy place in front of the inner curtain. On it he burned the fragrant incense, just as the Lord had commanded him. He hung the curtain at the entrance of the tabernacle, and he placed the altar of burnt offering near the tabernacle entrance. On it he offered a burnt offering and a grain offering, just as the Lord had commanded him. It didn't specifically say that part before about offering the burnt and grain offerings. At least not in this chapter. Maybe it did earlier, but... So, the tabernacle part specifically is all set up now. And I also find it interesting that it's going into a little more detail of, like, where the items were set up. So, like, it mentioned the table being set up on the north side of the tabernacle, and then I guess the lampstand here, it's saying was set on the south side of it. Trying to remember where I read that. It was in here somewhere. There we go. Lampstand in the tabernacle across from the table on the south. Yeah. I think it's saying that the lampstand was on the south side, located across from the table on the north side. Not trying to say that the table was also on the south side, because that would conflict with what it said earlier, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, so then he hung the curtain at the entrance, and that was all kind of wrapped up. So then we get to verse 30. Next, Moses placed the wash basin between the tabernacle and the altar. He filled it with water so the priests could wash themselves. Moses and Aaron's sons used water from it to wash their hands and feet. Whenever they approached the altar and entered the tabernacle, they washed themselves, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then he hung the curtains forming the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar. And he set up the curtain at the entrance of the courtyard. So at last Moses finished the work. Now, it doesn't really say how long it took Moses to set all this up. It seems like a fair bit, but also not so much that it necessarily had to be like spanning multiple days or anything. But anyway, so yeah, that's all set up now. It still hasn't mentioned the priests getting anointed quite yet, but obviously they're going to be if they haven't been already. I imagine the washing was part of that anyway, whether they were washing before being anointed or after, so they didn't, drag the anointing oil with them into the tabernacle. But anyway, then we get to verse 34. And I think I'm just going to read through the end of the chapter and wrap things up. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could no longer enter the tabernacle because the cloud had settled down over it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Now whenever the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out on their journey, following it. But if the cloud did not rise, they remained where they were until it lifted. The cloud of the Lord hovered over the tabernacle during the day, and at night fire glowed inside the cloud, so the whole family of Israel could see it. This continued throughout all their journeys. So, the cloud representing God's presence with them, I assume it's possibly the same cloud, or at least a very similar one to, the cloud that guided them away from Egypt in the wilderness. And similarly, the fire glowing inside the cloud here might have been similar to the pillar of fire that guided them by night whenever they, needed light for that, whether traveling or not. But yeah, so the part where it says Moses could no longer enter the tabernacle is interesting. I'm not sure if that's just kind of the written way of saying that, like, the cloud was so dense that you couldn't see in the tabernacle, or I don't know. But, like, so if the cloud lifted, so if the cloud lifted from the tabernacle and the people would set out on their journey whenever that happened, and then the times when the cloud stayed, I mean, like, that was still, like, Aaron and the priests would have probably been doing their duties in the tabernacle while the cloud was over it, right? I mean, that is possible. It only says Moses could no longer see, or could no longer enter the tabernacle. Which, you know, if Moses were going about the priestly duties and such, he would have had to be anointed for that rather than the priests. So, you know, maybe in some sense there's been a bit of a change, or at least an addition to, you know, who gets to experience God's direct presence among the Israelites. But yeah, so basically this cloud also was a guide regarding whether they should stay in one place or go, kind of, you know, reflecting God's will for what they should do, whether they should stay or go in whatever circumstances that they found themselves. But yeah, I think that wraps it up for my thoughts on Exodus 40, which means we're done with Exodus. So yeah, that 2 books down, only, you know, 64 to go. But anyway, okay, so that's gonna do it for Exodus 40, and actually the entirety of Exodus. The tabernacle is officially up and being utilized, and I guess with that, Exodus comes to a close. So be on the lookout for Exodus Abridged sometime in the near future. Should catch you up to speed on things if you missed previous videos. At least give you a basic idea of what happened before we get into Leviticus. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's really it for now. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos to my channel. You can look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and stuff like that. And of course, leave comments down below with any thoughts you have. So that's it. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next chapter as we start Leviticus. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.